Will you please tell me, for the benefit of the listeners, the story of the escape of President De Valera, Sean Mulroy and Sean McGarry from Lincoln Jail in February 1919? You might begin by giving us an idea of the political situation which led to the imprisonment of these men.
All right. Among the nebulous plots of history was the so-called German plot of 1918, under which the British government made a sudden roundup and arrested every Irish Republican leader they could lay hands on. The plot was, as has been proved since, invented simply to crush the growing power of Sinn Féin and defeat the well-organised resistance towards conscription in Ireland. The rounded-up prisoners were scattered about England in various jails, and Mr. De Valera, whose thrilling escape I am now about to relate, was imprisoned in Lincoln, away on the east coast, and far from all Irish contacts. And although the war was over when the escape took place, England was still an armed camp, with war conditions, and Lincoln a military town. I want to emphasise this as it magnified the difficulty of escape. We in Ireland thought that a general release of the leaders would follow the armistice on the Western Front, but weeks passed, and there was no sign of it.
It was a stirring time. History was being made outside. World War I had ended in November 1918. A general election followed. In Ireland it resulted in a Republican landslide. The first Dáil Éireann met in Dublin in the following January and adopted the Declaration of Independence. There were only 27 members present at that first meeting. 36 more were held in various British jails. 3 more deported. 6 were on the run. The world was in a ferment. The countries of Europe, rising from the ruins of war, were planning a peace conference. Every nation but Ireland, whose leader was behind prison bars, was getting its cade ready. Every small nation but Ireland. Lincoln town is old and steep, full of odd and twisty byways. Outside the town stood the jail. Here in this medieval city on the east coast of England, Eamon de Valera and other leaders of Sinn Féin had been imprisoned since May 1918. De Valera chafed in jail. Were he free, he could bring Ireland's case for the first time into international politics. At home with the people behind him, he could do so many things. There was so much this newly released nation could do. Of all these things he was thinking day after day in Lincoln jail, thinking of the future and of the immediate present with its constant urge to escape.
It was tantalising to be within prison walls when there was work to be done to inform American opinion as to the true state of Irish feeling. I made up my mind to try and escape. It would only be done by cooperation with friends outside. It occurred to me that if I could get an impression of the key, I might be able to send it out in a postcard using plan and elevation method of drawing. A snatch of an old music hall song came into my head. The song went some way like this. He couldn't get the latchkey in, he couldn't. The tag ran through my mind. It haunted me. Somewhere in that comic song lay the solution. A drunken reveller coming home late at night, too unsteady in the hand to fit the latchkey of his home into the keyhole. That was it. Next it occurred to me that I could do this by sending out what would appear to be comic postcards, one with the essential part of the key correct in the plan, the other with the elevation. One Sunday, I noticed that the chaplain's maskey was laid aside carelessly. In a drawer in the sacristy were some wax candles. I smuggled them into a tobacco tin and melted them with my body heat. In a few moments, I had taken an impression of the key. Without thinking, I asked Sean Mulroy, one of the prisoners, to draw 2 postcards, sketches of a fellow prisoner, Sean McGarry. Sean was depicted in the first sketch with a key in his hand, trying to open the door of his house. Underneath was written, Christmas 1917, he can't get in. In the second sketch, McGarry sat disconsolate in a prison cell, staring at a large keyhole. The caption read, "Christmas 1918, he can't get out." These postcards might pass for merely a humorous depiction of McGarry's plight, but they contained the exact dimensions of the key. The next problem was to get the impression out and a copy of the key in. The copy had to come from Dublin.
Then a significant letter arrived in Dublin from Lincoln Jail. It had been smuggled out by a friendly official who used to carry small but harmless messages. This time he carried dynamite, though he did not know it. The letter was from John O'Mahony to a friend in Leeds. It was written in 3 languages: Irish, English, and Latin. The first part of the letter was in English, intended to be read by the warder should he be curious enough to do so. In English, it demanded a bottle of wine for John. The kernel was in the Irish. It explained the postcard and asked for a key. Details of the proposed escape were given. But in the meantime, the key had been made in Dublin. Mrs. McGarry had put it into a cake she had baked, and over to Lincoln travelled Fintan Murphy, an HQ staff man, with the key in the cake.
In a strange town as a stranger, it is difficult enough. I thought in the ordinary way to inquire the way to and show an interest in the jail. I with my parcel found it more difficult still, but I boldly took the plunge, and to my surprise, found it surprisingly simple. Nobody took any particular interest in my inquiries, and with little trouble, I soon found myself before the jail. The chief came in, a gruff individual, the usual prison type, obviously more used to dealing with persons convicted. I greeted him civilly, and, on his demand, as to my business, I repeated my carefully rehearsed story as to how I came to be there. He grunted disagreeably and commented on how these so-and-so Irish prisoners were able to get butter, bacon, and all these good things, while the men who were doing their bit for king and country had to eat war bread. I agreed with him. Meanwhile, I watched the parcel being slowly opened and waited for the climax. At last the cake lay exposed on the table, and while we continued our conversation, he produced a long knife. I assumed it was hardly possible for him to miss the key. Instead of cutting us in quarters, he stabbed it through and through, and with further sundry grumbles at the luxuries for the rebel prisoners, he escorted me to the gate and let me out. I was immensely relieved, both that I was outside and the cake inside the jail. I strolled down to the railway station to depart from the town of Lincoln, to which I have never since returned.
I don't remember whether I suggested the method by which the key would be sent to the prison, but it arrived in due course in a cake. As I examined the key, my joy at having got it was qualified by the feeling it was too small. I examined the key with a drawing, and it fitted perfectly. It seemed to be exactly what we wanted, but I could not avoid the impression that it was not as large as the actual key. It proved later that I was right. I had heated the wax into a soft condition, and I pressed the key down on it as it lay confined within the tobacco tin, and allowed it to harden. The result was that in the shrinkage caused by the cooling of the wax, the impression became uniformly smaller than the original key. All that work had to be done over again.
The prisoners sent out another postcard. This time it contained an elaborate Celtic design, and among it was interwoven another drawing of a key. An inscription underneath in Irish stated, "This was the key to freedom." Again, a key was made, another cake was baked. I brought this to the jail gate and was thankfully spared Fintan Murphy's ordeal, for the gatekeeper took it from me at the door. This key was tried out by Sean McGarry on a cell door, but it broke in the lock. They dare not leave it there, so they prized it out hurriedly with wire before a warder came along. At this point, Boland and Collins arrived in Lincoln again. Another letter went in by the prison chaplain. It bore a code in Irish interspersed with English words. Back comes a letter from the prisoners asking for files and keys. Blank keys this time. So a third cake was baked. It was Mrs. O'Sullivan who made it, and an Irish girl working in England who took it to the gate.
The third cake held more hardware than raisins. The cake was baked by my sister, with her housekeeper Mrs. O'Sullivan. I saw my sister put the key at one end and the files at the other end of the cake. It was oblong in shape. Its weight was terrific. Instead of almond icing, there was a thin coating of plaster of Paris to keep the cake from breaking. Why they didn't comment on the nature of the cake was a miracle. Maybe they were tired of seeing cakes by that. Many an Irish prayer went into those Lincoln cakes. Third time lucky. With the files and the blank keys it contained, Peter de Lochary, another prisoner, cut a perfect master key. He actually took the lock off a disused cell door, with no other instrument other than a little typewriter screwdriver belonging to de Valera.
And so, many anxious weeks after the dispatch of the postcards, a night was fixed for the escape. Now we were to be up against the worst of it. Lincoln was an armed camp. It was an RAF base. Opposite the back wall of the prison, near the gate marked as the escaping gate, was a large emergency hospital for troops. Military traffic on it was unceasing. Every night, the wounded Tommies would drift back to hospital. They'd linger outside for hours with their girls before they went in. Now that the plan was ready, the whole of the Dublin headquarters staff came on the job. Every possible contingency was provided for. The whole lie of the land was mapped, roads drawn, distances and vital points marked. The night of February 3rd, just before lockup, was the time chosen. All along the route of escape, the Irishmen were at their posts. It was after dark when Collins and Boland arrived at the jail. Among our equipment was a coiled rope ladder which made an enormous parcel, heavier than any of the Lincoln cakes. This was to be the last resort. On the stroke of the appointed hour, Collins and Boland flashed their torch upwards from the dark fields outside. From a high jail window, a sudden light flashed in answer.
It had been arranged that a flashlight outside the prison walls would indicate the presence of the rescuers. That was to be answered by a flare from my cell window. The flare consisted of a bunch of matches. I lit the matches, creating the flash, then blew them out again. Then, for the escape.
Down the long dim corridors, de Valera hurried with the two men he had asked to escape with him, Sean Mulroy and Sean McGarry. There would be danger in too many trying to escape. Like shadows across the grass sped Collins and Boland to meet them. Collins thrust his duplicate key into the lock in the postern gate of the back wall. The slight pressure snapped it. Both men stood in unspeakable dismay. Collins with the handle of the broken key in his hand. Inside, the escaping prisoners were having better luck. De Valera's master key had already brought them through 3 inner doors, each of which was opened and locked again with great precision. They had escaped from their own wing and passed through its door. They had crossed a courtyard and then had to enter a second building. Out of this building they had made their way, and across the last yard which led to the jail wall. Here there was an inner door. Once more the master key did its work, and it too swung open. But not to freedom. For there, between the prisoners and their rescuers, stood the last door of all, an iron-covered gate. And it was in this gate that Collins' key had broken and stuck.
In whispers we conferred through the iron gate. I've broken the key in the lock, Dave. It was a terrible moment. Breathing a prayer, de Valera inserted his master key into the last lock. Very carefully he put it in. It met with the stub of Collins' broken key. I pushed it before it. The lock turned. The outer gate swung open. They were free.
I had locked every door when I got on the outside, and was about to lock that door also, when Harry said, "You'll have to hurry up, the time is nearly up." And I had to leave it unlocked. Had I locked that door, nobody would ever know how we had escaped.
5 shadows now bore towards the 5-barred gate. which separated them from the Rugby Road. The Tommies were drifting back to hospital, lingering with their girls at the gate. There was no way out but through the groups of courting couples. As the 5 conspirators passed, the cheery Harry Borland called out,
"Good night, chums,"
as he went by. The rest of the De Valera escape was timing and organisation. The rest of the story belongs to Mr. Donoghue, who took them in the first stage to Worksop, and to Fintan Murphy, who put them in the road to Sheffield, and to Mr. Liam McMahon, who did the rest. It was much more difficult than it seems. There were heavy wartime restrictions on petrol and the use of taxis. So 3 weeks after the Lincoln jailbreak, De Valera came home by that port. But not to public acclamation. His new position of escaped prisoner prevented that. But public welcomes were no longer necessary. His amazing prison coup had already set all of Ireland aflame.